do you want to go in this order, or did you guys care about what order you went in?
I think Martin should go.
I think Martin should go too, right? And then you, as usual, you can be the moderating force in the middle.
Yeah.
Okay, good.
Okay, well, thank you, Bob. And thank you, Reuel. Reuel is a very old friend. We had the same teachers. And I'm delighted that he's added another contribution to the shelf. But I know I was invited to dissent, so I will oblige. Reuel's thesis is that we should be glad to see the old authoritarian order implode, because it could never evolve. You used the word evolution again in your presentation. And we shouldn't fear what looks like the inevitable triumph of Islamism through the ballot box, because this new order can evolve eventually in the right direction. That's the message in a nutshell.
In a nutshell.
In a nutshell. Now, I agree that the old order couldn't evolve. I think Reuel is quite right on that point. The old regimes can only perpetuate themselves for some amount of time until they weaken and someone figures out a way to topple them. And of course, this is not an entirely new revelation. You find it also in Ibn Khaldun. I also agree that the Islamists are going to have their moment. If Palestine and Turkey and Tunisia put Islamists in power through the ballot, you can bet that it's going to happen in Egypt and in Libya and in Syria if that day comes. So we have to weather this change and do what little we can to forestall worst-case scenarios. And I suppose that in order to do that, we also have to be seen as embracing change. Here's my concession to you. If I were writing speeches for Barack Obama, I too would compare the makers of the Arab Spring to Boston's Patriots and to Rosa Parks. And I suppose we have to say, as a State Department official said the other day, that if Egyptian elections are free and fair and the Muslim Brotherhood wins, the United States will be, quote, satisfied. But this is where I part with Reuel. I wouldn't really be satisfied at all. And Reuel, I think, would. In fact, his book might have been subtitled, How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love the Islamists. Now, what is it really?
I was never that worried. But.
What is it about
He was never worried.
What is it about these former Intel hands?
Uh-oh.
That they have this, I
Now
know.
we're going to the ad hominem.
That they have this I know something that you don't know approach to Islamists. And I'm thinking of Graham Fuller, ex-CIA, Alistair Crook, ex-MI6, Ephraim Halevi, ex-Mossad. Each of them in his own quirky way tells us we can get what we want from the Islamists if we talk to them and stroke them and maybe even pay them off. Now, of course, this has a long history going back to the origins of the Cold War. We used the Islamists against the Soviets. Many thought we should use them against Al-Qaeda. Reuel, as Fuad Ajami reveals in the preface to this book, is ex-CIA. And half the time I thought he was winking at me and telling me, don't worry, we've got their number. If Islamists win elections, it'll be all right because we planted this democracy chip in their brains. They can't get it out. And in the end, they will come to Papa America. Well, we shall see. Here's a quote. We are going to have a republic, a democracy. Every group is emphasizing the words democratic and republic as much as Islamic. End of quote. Now, that wasn't said this year in Tunisia or in Egypt. It was said in February 1979 by an Iranian revolutionary at a rally at Princeton University where I heard it myself. And I recently went back to the Daily Princetonian to make sure I remembered it correctly after all these years. Reuel, I think, is wrong when he writes that there was never any deception on the part of Khomeini. There was a massive deception campaign, and it worked. And I think we're again witnessing campaigns of deception all the way back to Tahrir Square, and they're working again. Can movements that don't practice democracy internally, that believe they answer to a power above the will of the people, that divide humanity into believers and unbelievers, build and sustain democracy? In saying yes, I think Reuel has written a very American book. It's a flattering paean to the power of an American idea. And all I can say is I hope he's right. But let's acknowledge that however Americans try, they always seem to come up with some variation of modernization theory, which says that the world wants what Americans want in the way that Americans want it. And let's admit that this almost always sets up America for a fall. Now, I will end by, as I should, with a comment on the implications for Israel. Reuel has a passage that left me bewildered, coming as it does from an old intel hand. And I quote him, some Muslim autocracies have signed peace treaties with Israel. They may not guarantee all that much, but the signed paper does exist. End of quote. Well, if that's all you have to say...
there's the rest of it.
What is the rest of it?
You cut off the rest of it.
What?
Never mind. There's
It's his turn, Reuel. He can do whatever he wants to do.
If that is the core of what you have to say about the relationship between Israel and Egypt, Israel and Jordan, then I think you're missing the point. The political and the security and the intelligence relations with Egypt and Jordan have been intense. They have been game-changing for Israel. There were, of course, no public expressions of warmth. But under Mubarak, no mobs stormed the Israeli embassy either. Israelis aren't so daft as to think that some evolution of Egypt under Muslim Brotherhood tutelage is going to produce an improvement on what Israel had. Reuel writes that, quote, Israel's security will be lasting only when Muslim peoples, not their ever less popular governments, accept the Jewish homeland, end of quote. Well, I don't know what lasting means, but I do know that whether it's governments or peoples, this acceptance is a function of Israeli power to defeat them. The governments appreciated that power, and I'd like to know how Reuel thinks the Muslim peoples are going to reach the same understanding. Will Israel have to defeat them too? More particularly, will it have to do to Islamism what it did to Arab nationalism in 1967? I'm also perplexed by the poli-sci bromide that democracies eventually bring lasting peace, dictatorships don't. That was, of course, believable when a set of democracies included the United States and its dependencies. The Middle East, with the Muslim Brotherhood setting the tone, is quite likely, I think, to disprove this thesis. That is, if Israel's wars in 2006 and 2008, with those Arabs who had cast the most ballots, the Palestinians and the Lebanese, didn't disprove it already. Only Israel's power and fear of it, I think, guarantees the peace. And whether Israel's adversaries do or don't drop ballots in a box doesn't make the slightest difference. And finally, the idea in the afterword that the Hashemite monarchy, you know I'd get you on this,
It was for you.
should turn over power to the Palestinians is, I don't know, bizarre. Because there's no expiration in that in your text whatsoever as to the implications. We're simply told that we must be consistent. As Emerson wrote, a foolish consistency is the hobgoblin of little minds adorned by little statesmen and philosophers and divines. We're being pushed here to a foolish consistency. But if we're going to be consistent, why not be consistent in the way Middle Easterners expect? That is, you reward your friends and you punish your enemies, thus winning and keeping your friends. Now, given American values, I agree, standing by dictators might not always be advisable. But given American interests, neither is the overthrow of every single U.S. Friend, ally, and proxy. But still, let us give credit to Reuel Gerecht. He predicted the Arab Spring. And now he has made another prediction. Fear not that democracy has empowered Islamism, because Islamism will ultimately entrench democracy. That's a courageous stand. I commend him for putting his entire reputation online in this book. And I propose that we resolve now to reconvene in 3 years' time and see how he's doing, because after all, Reuel, what are friends for?